God says, "This is my final warning. Don't you dare accept this." Why this warning was sent through you specifically? What if this message didn't randomly land in front of you tonight, out of billions of people scrolling through billions of videos, but was actually assigned specifically to reach you because something about your exact life made you the precise person who needed to hear it? What if the algorithm, the timing, the exact sequence of clicks that brought you here tonight was never really random at all? And the reason it's you sitting here, reading this, rather than someone else, actually matters more than you've considered. Stay with me tonight, because we're going somewhere this entire series hasn't gone yet. Into the question of why you, specifically, out of everyone this warning could have reached. You've probably assumed this entire journey that this message could have reached anyone, that you simply happened to be the one who clicked on it tonight. One interchangeable viewer among countless others who might have stumbled onto the exact same words. That assumption, understandable as it is, quietly diminishes something significant. It treats your presence here as coincidence, rather than considering the possibility that you were actually the specific target this entire time. Have you been assuming your presence here tonight was simply random chance, rather than considering you might have been specifically the one this message was meant to reach? Why general modules still direct specific receivers? Here's something worth understanding clearly. Even a message written broadly, intended to reach many people, still requires someone specific to actually receive it, actually engage with it, actually let it matter. Out of everyone who scrolled past this exact title tonight, dismissing it in half a second, you're the one who stayed. That specific fact, you staying while countless others didn't, reveals something about you that deserves genuine consideration, rather than dismissal as pure coincidence. Out of everyone who could have scrolled past this exact message tonight, what do you think it reveals about you, specifically, that you stayed instead? Why your specific history made you capable of actually hearing this? Here's something worth considering honestly. Think about everything you've walked through in your own life, the specific struggles, the specific seasons of doubt, the specific wounds that shaped how you processed truth. That exact combination of experience uniquely prepared you to actually hear and understand this particular message in a way someone with a completely different history simply couldn't access the same way. You weren't randomly assigned this warning. Your specific story built the exact capacity required to receive it. What in your specific history do you think prepared you, uniquely, to actually understand and receive this particular message tonight? Why someone else in your life might actually need this message through you? Here's something worth considering with real weight. Perhaps this warning wasn't given to you purely for your own private transformation. Perhaps you're being specifically positioned to carry what you've learned across this entire journey towards someone else in your life. Someone who wouldn't have received it directly themselves, but who might genuinely receive it once it's been filtered through your own lived example, your own visible change, your own willingness to speak honestly about what you've walked through. Who in your life might actually need this exact message, but could only receive it through watching you live it out first? If this is landing somewhere real, that's exactly why this series exists. Subscribe now, because more of these truths are waiting for whenever your next season needs this kind of clarity about purpose. Why being chosen specifically doesn't mean you're more deserving than anyone else. Here's something important worth clarifying immediately. because this could easily be misunderstood as spiritual superiority. Being specifically positioned to receive this message tonight doesn't mean you're more worthy, more righteous, or more deserving than anyone who scrolled past it without a second thought. It simply means your specific circumstances, your specific readiness, your specific need, aligned with this specific moment. That's not a hierarchy of worth. It's simply timing and purpose, intersecting specifically with your life. Can you receive this specific selection as purpose, rather than superiority? Understanding it doesn't make you more deserving than anyone else. Why? Your specific dupes made you exactly the right person to hear this. Here's something worth understanding about a pattern that often surprises people. The very doubts, questions, and struggles you've carried, the ones that sometimes made you feel disqualified from genuine spiritual conviction, are often precisely what qualify you to actually hear a message like this honestly. Someone who's never doubted anything often can't fully receive urgent truth because they've never actually needed to wrestle with whether something was real. Your wrestling built exactly the honesty required to genuinely engage with tonight's warning. Could your own history of doubt and questioning actually be exactly what qualified you to receive tonight's message honestly, rather than disqualifying you from it? Why this message would have meant something different to anyone else? Here's something worth considering as final confirmation of this specific selection. If this exact message had reached someone else instead of you tonight, it would have landed completely differently, connected to different specific struggles, addressed different specific attachments, required different specific responses. The fact that it's landing on your exact life, your exact circumstances, your exact needs, reveals that this was never actually generic. It was always specifically for you. How has this message connected specifically to your exact circumstances in a way that reveals it was never actually generic content? If this reflection is meaningful to you, that's exactly why this series was written. Subscribe now, because there's more waiting for whenever your next chapter needs this kind of personal clarity. Why this responsibility doesn't have to feel overwhelming. Here's something worth releasing as this reflection nears its close. Understanding that you were specifically chosen to receive this doesn't mean you now carry an overwhelming, impossible responsibility to perfectly transform and immediately save everyone around you. It simply means continuing to do exactly what this entire journey has already taught you, responding honestly, acting concretely, staying soft rather than hardening, and trusting that your genuine, ongoing faithfulness will naturally reach exactly who it's meant to reach, in its own time. Can you release any overwhelming pressure attached to this specific selection, trusting instead that genuine ongoing faithfulness is enough? Truth for today. You weren't randomly scrolling when this message found you tonight. Your specific history, your specific doubts, your specific circumstances, all uniquely prepared you to actually receive and understand this particular warning in a way no one else could have received it in quite the same way. This wasn't generic content reaching a random viewer. This was specific purpose meeting a specific person, exactly on time. If you fully accepted that you were specifically meant to receive this message tonight, how would that change the seriousness with which you carry it forward? You've learned something today that transforms how you understand your entire presence throughout this series. That you weren't randomly here, that your specific history qualified you uniquely to receive this, and that someone else in your life might genuinely need this message carried to them through your own lived example. Stay purposeful. You were chosen specifically for this. Now carry it forward faithfully. If this message reached something real in you today, don't let it end here. Subscribe now, because more of these messages are coming exactly when you need them most. You were the one meant to receive this. Now become the one who carries it forward. What if your finger is already hovering over the skip button right now, and that exact instinct, the urge to scroll past this, is precisely the reaction this message was warned would happen? What if the difference between the life you're currently living and the life you were actually meant to live comes down to whether you keep scrolling in the next 10 seconds or whether you finally stop? I'm not going to soften this for you tonight. This is being called a final warning for a reason, and I need you to actually stay, because what happens in the next few minutes might matter more than you're currently willing to admit. You've probably scrolled past messages like this before, haven't you? Moments that felt slightly too intense, slightly too demanding, easier to swipe away than to actually sit with. And each time you did that, you told yourself it wasn't a big deal, that you'd catch the next one, that this particular moment wasn't actually as significant as it felt. That pattern of dismissal has probably become so automatic you don't even notice yourself doing it anymore. Have you developed a habit of scrolling past meaningful moments the instant they start feeling too intense or too demanding to sit with? Why? Final doesn't mean the message is running out. It means your resistance is. Here's something worth understanding clearly about why this warning is described as final. It's not suggesting that guidance itself is about to disappear from your life permanently. It's suggesting that your specific pattern of resisting, dismissing, and avoiding this particular truth has reached the point where continuing it will cost you something significant that gentler nudges haven't managed to prevent. The warning is final because your resistance has been persistent enough to require something stronger than the quiet nudges you've already ignored. Has your resistance to a specific truth in your life been persistent enough that gentler reminders have already failed to break through it? Why you already know what this is actually about. Here's something worth being honest about right now. You probably already have a specific thing in mind, something you've been avoiding, denying, or minimizing for longer than you'd like to admit. This message isn't introducing something entirely new to you. It's confronting something you've already sensed clearly, repeatedly, but have kept finding reasons to postpone actually addressing. If you're honest with yourself right now, what specific thing came to mind the moment you read the word warning in this message's title? Why skipping this specifically protects the pattern you know you need to break? Here's something worth understanding about the actual function of your urge to skip. It's not random. It's protective, specifically protecting the exact pattern this message is asking you to finally address. The stronger your urge to click away right now, the more likely it is that this message is aimed directly at something significant, something your own avoidance instinct recognizes as a genuine threat to the comfortable status quo it's been maintaining. Does your urge to skip this message actually intensify, rather than fade, the longer you sit with what it might specifically be pointing toward? If this is landing somewhere real in you, that's exactly why this series exists. Subscribe now, because part 2 goes even deeper into exactly what's at stake if this warning continues going unheeded. Hi, this isn't about fear, even though it sounds dramatic. Here's something important worth clarifying immediately, because the intensity of this message could easily be mistaken for manipulation through fear. This warning isn't designed to frighten you into blind obedience. It's designed to finally break through years of comfortable dismissal, using language strong enough to actually register after gentler approaches have consistently failed. The intensity reflects how much you're loved, not an attempt to control you through anxiety. Can you receive this intensity as genuine care breaking through years of dismissal, rather than manipulation designed to control you through fear? Why every previous warning was actually mercy, not punishment. Here's something worth understanding about the pattern that's led to this exact moment. Every quieter warning you've received and dismissed before tonight wasn't failure or punishment. It was mercy, giving you chance after chance to respond before the situation required something as direct and unmistakable as what you're hearing right now. That patient repetition, culminating in this final, unmistakable moment, reflects extraordinary patience rather than impatience finally running out. Can you see the pattern of previous gentler warnings as extraordinary patience, rather than simply a build-up toward eventual frustration? Why this moment repures a decision, not just further reflection? Here's something worth acknowledging honestly. You've probably already done plenty of reflecting on whatever this specific issue actually is. More reflection alone, without an actual decision attached to it, simply becomes another sophisticated form of the same avoidance you've already practiced repeatedly. Tonight requires something different than additional thinking. It requires you to actually decide, right now, to respond differently than you have before. Are you prepared to actually decide something tonight, rather than simply reflecting further on something you've already thought about extensively? If this is landing somewhere real, that's exactly why this series exists. Subscribe now, because Part 2 continues exploring exactly what genuine response actually requires of you. Why the cost of continued avoidance is already accumulating quietly. Here's something worth taking seriously. Whatever this specific issue is, continued avoidance hasn't actually kept it safely frozen in place while you decided whether to eventually address it. It's been quietly accumulating cost this entire time, whether that's damaged trust, declining health, deepening financial instability, or simply years slipping past that could have been spent living differently. That cost doesn't pause simply because you haven't been ready to look at it directly. What cost do you think has already been quietly accumulating during the time you've spent avoiding this specific issue? Truth for tonight. You didn't accidentally end up watching this message tonight, and the intensity of your own resistance to it, that urge to skip, to dismiss, to scroll past, is itself evidence of exactly how significant this actually is for your life. This warning arrived as final, not as punishment, but as the necessary weight required to finally break through a pattern of avoidance that gentler reminders haven't managed to interrupt. If you finally responded honestly to this warning tonight, rather than continuing the pattern of dismissal, what do you believe would actually change in your life starting tomorrow? You almost skipped this, and that almost skip reveals exactly how much this message needed to reach you tonight. Whatever specific truth you've been avoiding, dismissing, or minimizing, tonight is asking you to finally stop, finally decide, and finally respond differently than you have before. This is only part 1. Part 2 goes deeper into exactly what's at stake and what genuine response actually requires of you now. If this message reached something real in you tonight, don't let it end here. Subscribe now, because Part 2 continues exactly where this left off. You didn't skip it. Now don't skip what comes next. In part 1, we talked about the urge you almost gave into, the skip you almost pressed, and why that specific resistance revealed exactly how much this message needed to reach you. Tonight, we go somewhere deeper than warning alone. Because a warning without love behind it is just noise. And I need you to understand something before we go any further. Everything urgent about this message exists because of a love so patient, so specific, so personally attentive to your exact life, that it refuses to let you keep walking towards something that would genuinely cost you your peace. Are you ready to actually understand where this urgency has been coming from the entire time? You've probably experienced warnings before that felt cold, transactional, more concerned with rules being followed than with you specifically being protected. Maybe a parent who warned you out of their own anxiety rather than genuine understanding. Maybe an authority figure who used fear to control rather than to genuinely guide you somewhere better. Those experiences have likely made you suspicious of any warning delivered with intensity. Assuming intensity always signals control rather than care. Has past experience with cold, controlling warnings made you suspicious of any warning delivered with real intensity, even when it might genuinely be rooted in love? Why every true warning Jesus ever gave was wrapped in tears, not anger. Here's something worth understanding with real reverence tonight. Throughout everything recorded about how Jesus actually delivered hard truths, warnings, and corrections, he wasn't cold or detached while doing it. There's a specific moment recorded where he looked out over an entire city he knew was about to walk into devastating consequences, and instead of simply condemning them from a distance, he wept, genuinely, over people who were about to reject exactly the peace being offered to them. That's the actual heart behind every warning worth taking seriously. Not anger looking for an excuse to punish. Grief over what continued avoidance would genuinely cost the people he loved. Can you imagine this exact warning tonight being delivered with that same grief, that same tearful love, rather than cold anger, looking for a reason to condemn you? Why his entire life was spent cursing the exact people most likely to ignore him. Here's something worth sitting with deeply. Jesus didn't spend his ministry primarily surrounded by people who had it all figured out, people already living perfectly obedient lives, who simply needed a gentle affirmation. He spent his time specifically with people who were struggling, people who'd been rejected everywhere else, people whose lives were genuinely messy and complicated. Tax collectors nobody respected, people caught in shame nobody wanted associated with. He pursued exactly the people most likely to assume this kind of love wasn't actually meant for them. If he specifically pursued people who felt disqualified and unworthy, why would tonight be any different for whatever you've been carrying? Why his miracles were never just about power. They were always about seeing someone specifically. Here's something worth understanding about the actual pattern behind every recorded miracle throughout his life. They were never performed as a general display of power, meant to impress a crowd. Each one responded to a specific person's specific pain. A blind man who'd been begging for years, a woman who'd been bleeding for over a decade and spent everything she had trying to be healed, a father desperate for his dying child. Every act of power was actually an act of being seen, individually, completely, in the exact specific shape of someone suffering. Does it change how you receive this message tonight? Realizing that every display of power throughout his life was actually about seeing one specific person completely, exactly the way you're being seen right now. If this is landing somewhere real, that's exactly why this series exists. Subscribe now, because more of these truths are waiting for whenever your next season needs this kind of personal, specific love. Why every lesson he taught was designed to actually work in real life, not just sound good. Here's something worth understanding about why his teaching still transforms lives thousands of years later. It was never abstract philosophy, disconnected from how people actually live. Forgive 70 times 7, not because it's a nice sentiment, but because measured, limited forgiveness genuinely destroys relationships and poisons the person withholding it. Love your enemies, not because it's idealistic, but because hatred carried indefinitely genuinely corrodes the heart, holding it far more than it ever touches the person being hated. Every single teaching, examined honestly, actually works, practically, in real human lives, exactly the way it's meant to be lived. Which specific teaching from his life, once you actually applied it honestly, genuinely changed something practical in your real everyday life? Why his patience with fascia was far greater than his patience with pride. Here's something worth understanding clearly about the actual pattern of who he was gentle with and who he confronted directly. He was remarkably patient, remarkably gentle, toward people who genuinely failed, who were ashamed, who knew they'd fallen short, and came honestly seeking help. His sharpest words were reserved specifically for people who refused to admit they needed anything at all. People whose pride kept them from ever genuinely receiving what was being offered. That pattern reveals something crucial tonight. Your failures were never the barrier. Pride pretending you don't need this warning would be. Is pride more than actual failure? What's been keeping you from genuinely receiving what's being offered to you tonight? Why the success he actually promised looked nothing like the world's definition. Here's something worth understanding about what genuine success actually looks like. According to everything he taught and modeled, it was never measured by wealth accumulated, status achieved, or admiration earned from crowds. It was measured by peace that doesn't depend on circumstances, love that doesn't require reciprocation, and a life so rooted in genuine purpose that external chaos couldn't actually shake its foundation. If you've been chasing a definition of success that leaves you exhausted and empty despite achieving it, this warning tonight might be specifically redirecting you toward the actual success you were meant to find. Have you been chasing a version of success that leaves you feeling empty despite achieving it, when genuine peace and purpose were actually the success you were meant to find? If this is landing somewhere real, that's exactly why this series exists. Subscribe now, because part 3 continues exploring exactly how to actually walk in this kind of success starting tomorrow. Why this warning tonight is actually an invitation to Gita's urgency. Here's something worth understanding as this journey deepens. Underneath the intensity of being called a final warning, what's actually being extended to you tonight is an invitation, one wrapped in urgency specifically, because your own resistance required something strong enough to finally break through. Every hard truth he ever spoke was ultimately in service of an invitation toward something better, never simply a threat existing for its own sake. Tonight, that same pattern holds true for you specifically. Can you receive tonight's warning as an invitation towards something genuinely better, rather than simply a threat meant to frighten you into compliance? Truth for today: everything urgent about tonight's message exists because of a love specific enough to weep over an entire city, patient enough to pursue exactly the people most likely to feel disqualified, powerful enough to see one person completely in the exact shape of their unique suffering, and wise enough to teach truths that genuinely work in real, complicated human life. This warning isn't cold. It's the exact opposite. It's love, refusing to let you keep walking toward something that would genuinely cost you the peace you were always meant to have. If you received tonight's warning as this kind of deeply personal, specific love rather than as fear or control, how differently would you respond to it starting right now? You've learned something today that transforms how you understand everything urgent about this entire message. That genuine warning is always wrapped in genuine love, that every miracle and lesson throughout his life was aimed at one specific person, seen completely, and that tonight's urgency exists specifically because you are loved enough to be pursued this persistently. Stay open. Let love, not fear, be what finally breaks through tonight. There's more ahead. Part 3 goes into exactly what genuine response requires practically, and how to walk in the success this love was always pointing you toward. If this message is helping you see more clearly, subscribe now, because Part 3 continues exactly where this left off. This was never about fear. It was always about how deeply you're loved. Why this will feel different tomorrow. What if tomorrow morning the exact conviction burning in you right now starts to feel quieter, more distant, easier to reason away? And that shift isn't proof this wasn't real tonight, but actually the most predictable, most important test this entire journey has been building toward. What if how you respond to that specific shift, not tonight's emotion, but tomorrow's quieter aftermath, is what actually determines whether everything across this entire series becomes permanent transformation or simply another powerful memory you eventually stop thinking about. Tonight, we finish this entire journey by preparing you for exactly what's coming next, because knowing it's coming changes everything about how you'll respond when it actually arrives. Here's something worth admitting honestly before we go any further. Tonight feels significant. The emotion is real, the conviction is genuine, and if you're honest, part of you probably believes this feeling will simply continue at this same intensity indefinitely, carrying you forward into whatever change you've committed to. But that expectation, understandable as it is, sets you up for a specific kind of confusion tomorrow, when the intensity naturally begins to fade, and you're left wondering if any of it was actually genuine at all. Have you ever experienced a powerful moment of conviction, only to feel confused and discouraged the next day, when that same intensity had noticeably faded? Why emotional intensity was never the actual evidence of genuine transformation. Here's something worth understanding clearly, because this single misunderstanding derails more genuine breakthroughs than almost anything else. The intensity of emotion you feel tonight was never actually the evidence that something genuine happened. Emotion accompanies genuine conviction, but it isn't the same thing as the conviction itself. And emotion, by its very nature, doesn't sustain itself at peak intensity indefinitely. If you measure whether tonight was real by whether you still feel this exact same way tomorrow, you're measuring with the wrong instrument entirely. Have you been measuring the genuineness of tonight's experience by whether the emotional intensity itself will remain constant, rather than by something more lasting? Why tomorrow's quieter feeling is actually evidence. The message was genuine, not proof it wasn't. Here's something worth understanding as a genuine reframe. If this message had been manipulative, designed purely to manufacture temporary emotional excitement, without any lasting substance underneath it, that excitement would likely spike dramatically and then collapse completely, leaving nothing behind at all. Genuine conviction behaves differently. It settles quietly into something steadier than tonight's intensity, less dramatic but more permanent. The difference between a firework and a foundation being poured. Can you trust that tomorrow's quieter feeling might actually indicate something more permanent settling into place, rather than evidence that tonight wasn't genuine? Why the enemy of your transformation works specifically through this exact gap. Here's something worth taking seriously as genuine warning. The specific gap between tonight's intensity and tomorrow's quieter aftermath is exactly where resistance to your transformation typically works hardest. Whispering that the feeling fading proves nothing actually happened, that you got carried away emotionally, that you can safely return to exactly how things were before, without any real consequence. That whisper arrives precisely because tonight's conviction was genuine enough to be worth actively working to undo. Have you noticed doubt, specifically targeting the fading of emotional intensity, using that fading as apparent proof that nothing genuine actually happened tonight? If this is landing somewhere real, that's exactly why this series exists. Subscribe now, because more of these truths are waiting for whenever your next season needs this kind of protection. Why writing down tonight's specific imagement matters more than you realize. Here's something practical worth doing right now, before this journey fully closes. Write down, specifically, exactly what you've committed to across this entire series, using your own words, capturing the clarity you have right now while it's still fully present. That written record becomes something concrete to return to tomorrow and the day after, when the feeling has naturally quieted, giving you something more reliable than memory alone to anchor your continued response. Have you written down your specific commitment from tonight? Or are you relying purely on memory to carry this forward into tomorrow? Why your hacks tomorrow matter more than your feelings tomorrow. Here's something worth internalizing deeply as this journey concludes. Tomorrow, you're not being asked to sustain tonight's exact emotional intensity. You're being asked to follow through on tonight's concrete commitment, regardless of what you happen to feel while doing it. Action, chosen consistently, regardless of fluctuating emotion, is what actually builds la transformation. Feelings were never meant to be the reliable engine driving this forward. Your choices are you prepared to follow through on tonight's commitment tomorrow, based on choice, rather than waiting to feel the same intensity you feel right now? If this is landing somewhere real, that's exactly why this series exists. Subscribe now, because more of these truths are waiting for whenever your next chapter needs this kind of steady commitment. Why every genuine spiritual breakthrough throughout history faced this exact same test. Here's something worth understanding about the universal pattern this specific test represents. Every genuine transformation recorded throughout history, every person who ever experienced real conviction and genuinely changed direction because of it, faced this exact same gap between initial intensity and quieter follow-through. This isn't a unique obstacle designed specifically to trip you up. It's simply the honest, universal shape genuine transformation always takes, requiring commitment to outlast the initial emotion that sparked it. Does it help to know that this exact test, the gap between intensity and quieter follow-through, is universal, faced by every genuine transformation throughout all of history? Why returning to this entire series again, whenever you need it, isn't weakness. Here's something worth releasing as this entire 7-part journey reaches its true conclusion. If, days or weeks from now, you find yourself needing to return to this series again, re-watching, rereading, reconnecting with the conviction you're feeling right now, that return isn't evidence of weakness or failure. It's simply wisdom, recognizing that ongoing commitment sometimes requires ongoing reinforcement. The same way physical training requires repeated practice rather than a single, isolated effort. Can you give yourself permission to return to this series again whenever you need reinforcement, without treating that return as evidence of failure? The final truth: tomorrow will feel different than tonight. That difference isn't proof this wasn't real. It's the predictable, universal pattern every genuine transformation throughout history has had to move through: the gap between initial intensity and steady, quiet follow-through, built on choice rather than feeling. Your written commitment, your concrete action, regardless of fluctuating emotion, and your willingness to return to this truth again whenever needed, are what actually carry tonight's conviction into permanent, lasting change. If you fully expected and prepared for tomorrow's quieter feeling, rather than being confused or discouraged by it, how differently would you follow through starting tomorrow morning? Series finale. You've walked through this entire 7-part journey, from almost skipping the exact message you needed most, through understanding the tearful, personal love behind every warning, through witnessing complete response and the danger of partial obedience, through recognizing the cost of repeated skipping, and now, finally, understanding exactly what to expect and how to respond when tonight's intensity naturally fades tomorrow. You are prepared now, more fully than when this journey began, to carry this forward, not on feeling alone, but on genuine, lasting choice. If this series meant something real to you, don't let it end here. Subscribe now, because there's always another message waiting for exactly the moment you need it most. And this channel isn't finished showing up for you yet. Tomorrow will feel different. Follow through anyway. That's where the real transformation actually lives.